by next week I should have your papers back to you. So before I forget to tell you that, I'd like for everybody to take one of these. Let's take one and pass it. We got a hole punch for who gets that one. These books are what you're going to be doing for the next 8 weeks. And this is actually the condensed version. So what we have here, it's actually a workbook. They took the actual book, which I've read in the past, it's a great book, and they reduced each chapter to about 2 or 3 pages of a summary. Some might not even be that long. But what we're going to do as a class is go through this together, and the schedule I've given you shows clearly how we're going to pull this off in the next 8 weeks. We're going to have to cover about 3 laws per week. So we're not going to plan on giving you heavy homework in the other classes. This is pretty much the main homework. If Mike has a little homework for his class, that's fine. But I think this will be okay as far as the workload. Let's just communicate. If some of you guys are too overwhelmed, if it's to the point where you're struggling, you got to speak up. I mean, you guys are quote unquote big boys and girls. So now let me shoot you straight on some of these. When I went through this for the first time, some of these 21 laws you might find as he has you do an exercise and an activity, boy, I don't feel like this applies to me. I don't feel like I'm running a group of people. I'm not in charge of a corporation. So understand, first of all, that some of you may currently not be overseeing a body of people yet. However, each of you do claim to be leaders, correct? We had the very first day, I said, man, fill out this form. What's one area of leadership that you're in? And some of you guys put down, I'm the head of my family. I'm in charge of my family, which is true. Like Shane, I know it's kind of new for you, but you're in charge of not just the babies in the nursery, but the people who are, you're a leader of leaders in the nursery. So think of discipleship. Everybody in this room should be active in discipleship. And I'm not talking about somebody discipling you. I'm talking about you investing in somebody else. You say, well, Bo, you haven't handed anybody to me yet. That's not my responsibility. It's your responsibility to lead somebody to Christ. Start investing in a Timothy. So my point is this. Start owning it. Start leading people. Be an influencer, right? Because what's the definition of leadership? It's moving people onto God's agenda. Everybody should have a Paul, everybody should have a Timothy. And I don't remember if he says that in this book, but that's I don't know if you guys have ever heard that before. You should have a Paul, you should have always somebody that you look to, that you can say, I'm following him as he follows Christ. Because as long as you're on this earth, you're going to need that. You'll never arrive. But you should also have somebody who looks to you that way. And if you don't, I challenge you, pray, seek God's face, and say, Lord, who do I need to start investing my time and energy into? I mean, obviously your family. That's a given. But I'm talking even outside of that, maybe in your tribe. That's going to be the natural setting where that's going to take place. So my point is this. I want you to think outside the box as you're going through some of these principles, and even think, how can this apply to my work? Because there's an aspect of leadership, and we all do different things. But think of in your neighborhood. Think of a Christian as in general. The very first time we see the word rule in Scripture, do you remember what it's referring to? It's referring to the moon. Well, what's the moon a picture of? Yeah, the church. It reflects the sun. We have no light of our own, but the moon is to rule the nighttime. So you're a leader in that light. Think of that as you're going through this. So my point is this. I want you, as you go through these exercises, I want you to type it on paper like you did your assignment. So like next week, you'll see is October 30th. You're going to have the first 3 laws typed out, and you'll see the exercise. If you go to page 1, it covers the first law, and it gives basically four simple pages on what that law is. And then there's some simple questions. says observe. These won't need typed out, you can fill it out in your workbook. But there's some where you might need to type, and we'll see when we get to it. But you see observe, you'll fill out the answers. Learn. He gives you some charts that you look at, and then discuss. There's more questions. Okay, apply is the part where you're going to have to type. List some of your major goals, assess your leadership ability, ask others to rate your leadership, average scores, interview someone with whom you consider to have. I tell you what I'm going to do, since I'm a nice guy. On that part on page 9 where it says apply, I'm not going to have you worry about typing that out. We'll go back to that. That's a great exercise, but with all these other questions, I'm going to have you just focus on that, because you've also got laws 2 and 3. This is all by next week, okay? I don't think law 2.
Or the take action part 2 at the end of that?
Yep.
Okay.
All the questions that are in here, we'll go through. You'll do law 2, then you'll do law 3. So this is really going to cause you to think, apply. If something completely doesn't apply, say, I think maybe here's an area it could apply, but I'm not quite there yet. Write that stuff down.
And jot it off to the side. Or
Totally.
if you want to write down in a notebook. Or just
No, let's for now, for next week, let's just use the blanks that are in the book. If you need extra space, that's fine. You can get a notebook paper.
So when it comes to the apply section,
That's what I'm
jot notes to the side, because there's really no place to write
Yeah,
for
that's what I
that.
was
Well, what I was telling you is on like this first one, that applies a lot.
So just the first one, so type out the second and third
Let
one?
me look at the second,
Okay.
third. The law of influence, apply. Tell you what, don't worry about typing any of the applies on 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
But what I expect next week is for the first 3 laws, all those questions to be filled out. We're gonna take a chunk each class and go through it together. Obviously, we've got a new leaf we're turning in our teaching. We're gonna start looking at Ezra and some biblical principles there. So I don't want this to rob all the time. But every week, this is gonna be a good chunk of your grade. A good chunk of your grade was on the paper we just did, that you did the analysis of Moses, but the majority, I think, will fall with your participation in this. So this is just gonna cause you to examine, and it was really good for me. You can't just BS your way through this, you gotta be honest. And you're not gonna grow in these areas if you're not honest. It's like taking a personality test. You guys heard the kind where there's 4 animals? You've got the lion, and you've got the otter, and you've got the golden retriever, then you've got the beaver. Well, I know the very first time I took that test, I told myself I was a lion. Well, guess what? I was lying. Because everybody wants to be the lion, so you just check the ones that you think are that, and then I finally, when I took it again, was honest enough to say, that's not really who I am. I wanted to kind of have that personality and that makeup, but I'm a retriever. That's the way God made me. So we got to be like that a little bit with this too, because this is kind of like that. It's examining who you are as a leader, and then what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. What I would like to do before we start, let's all go to page, towards the beginning here. Go to page 14, Roman numeral 14, still the intro.
What does that look like?
X1B.
Okay, thank you.
It's the 21 Laws of Leadership Evaluation. We're going to take a few minutes. I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this evaluation on your own.
Okay. Yeah, that's another one. Okay.
So, if you notice, it says read each statement below and score yourself for each using the following scale. 0 is never, 1 is rarely, 2 is occasionally, 3 is always. What I would like you to do right now, and I don't want you to spend too much time on this, let's just do this. It took me probably about 5 minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to do this. So I want you to go ahead and do this right now. Just read through each one, put a number next to each letter, and then add a total for each law. Does that make sense? So let's take a few minutes. I'm going to let you do that right now before we continue. So did anybody score any nines? Take a peek at where your nines are. Two nines, what are your two nines, Shane?
The law of the lid and the law of routine.
Okay, so the law of the lid, what's that tagline say underneath the law of the lid?
Leadership ability determines a person's level of effectiveness.
Okay? And we're gonna learn about that law. So, in fact, next week, we'll talk about it. So it'll be interesting, Shane, for you to, as you read through it, go through the details, and to see, is that pretty accurate? Do I feel like that's one of my strengths? Because, let's face it, guys, even the guy that wrote this, his name's John Maxwell, he writes tons of leadership books. He used to be a pastor, so he even uses scripture for a lot of this. And this isn't an overly biblical book, even though he does take biblical principles. So what I'm saying is this: chew the meat, spit out the bones. I'm not saying I agree with everything that's in here, but it's good for us to examine some of these things he's saying. And Shane might say, wow, I thought that I was actually strong in this area. It turns out some of my strengths are more so in this law over here. But John Maxwell, the author, even said that there's a few laws that I'm weak in. And the point is this: don't sit there and focus on all of your weaknesses. Capitalize on your strengths. Learn to work with others who can focus on your weaknesses. See how that works? It's kind of like I used to share, I think I've shared with you guys. Mike, myself, and Todd, it would be silly if all of us had the same strengths. You know, we wouldn't be able to work together, but I tried to mimic him at first, the first 3-4 years of being here, and I realized that that's not the point. We're not near as effective. God made us differently so that Mike can lean on my strengths, and then I can lean on his strengths. And that's the way that it's supposed to be. Notice a lot of marriages tend to operate that way too. You've heard the phrase opposites attract. There's a lot of truth to that. So we need to tap into our differences, utilize each other. That's effective leadership. So anyways, anybody else want to share a 9? Maybe something you felt like, yeah, I scored and I agree or I disagree with this analysis.
I have the law of connection.
Okay, what's that say underneath it?
I have the same one in mine.
Leaders touch the heart before they ask for a hand.
Would you guys say that you're big on connecting with someone's heart? That's
Yeah.
a key component. If you're not connecting with their heart. Now Taylor, my guess is you probably didn't get the highest on that.
I probably got like 2.
I got five.
But you know what?
You got that high on that one?
Yeah,
I can't believe you even got that
I had to
high.
think about it for a while. There was some like,
See me, I'm kind of in the middle of the road on that one.
Okay.
It's just neat to see how we're all made differently, and it doesn't mean that Taylor's wrong and you're right, because there's going to be areas where Taylor's going to score high and that, you know, you guys will score low. So, anybody else want to share one that, yeah, I thought this was my strength? A 9?
What was the other one I had a 9 on?
I got
The law of the
a 9.
heart?
The connection.
Connection, yeah.
I have a 9 on the next came down to the law of the inner circle.
I had 8.
A leader's potential and is determined by those closest to him.
Gotcha.
I had a 9 on the law of victory. It says, leaders find a way for the team to win.
Mm.
And then the last one, love your legacy. The leader's lasting value is measured by person.
Mm. That's a good one. As you guys were going through this, was it challenging on some of them? Were you like, ooh, I don't know how to answer that one?
Yeah.
This one, like,
Yeah, and that's okay. I didn't expect you to take a long time on this. And here's the thing, I would recommend in a year, take this again. You know, use another color or get another book or whatever, but you can take it again. You're gonna find that you've changed in some areas. You've grown in some of these specific areas. Some of the areas won't be as applicable, kind of like as you read probably some of these, you're like, you know, I'm not sure, like the law of navigation, I'm not really steering a ship. You know, you can apply your household in that light, but
It was hard for me because I'm like, I don't have a job other than my 2 kids.
sure,
And like,
and I can understand that.
that was
Yeah, I
hard.
had to use like past military experience. 50 your fault, cause I was underneath for so many years.
Well, what you just,
Unbelievable.
everything rises and falls on leadership, David.
Yeah, he's blaming
Ain't no
you.
price at the top though. It just falls to the bottom.
Grapple downhill.
So what you guys just did, you got a small glimpse of what this book is about. You're gonna have to be honest, guys, you need to put some time into it. That, I mean, we're not having you do the reading for the Bible overview class because of things like this. So if we didn't have this, I'd say, okay, read First and Second Samuel, you know, we're hitting those now, or read First and Second Chronicles, but, you know, we wanna be advocates, we don't wanna be enemies of you guys. I mean, when I went through shepherd school, they put a lot on us. I felt like they put a lot more than we put on you guys. So we're trying to be sensitive, because I want you guys to take this stuff and use it. I don't wanna just feed you information. I want you to be sharpened, and sometimes it's gonna hurt, you're gonna get pruned. So we need these times, we need the application. You're gonna need some late nights. I used to drink Surge, and that's what kept me awake to get me, remember Surge?
Yeah, I do.
That's what got me through shepherd school, and the Holy Spirit, he helped along. So, anyhow, all right, any questions on this workbook? We'll be going through it each week, but next week, let's plan on having the first 3 chapters finished.
Neat, man. What was that?
What you doing over there, man? Guys, let's go to the book of Ezra. Ezra is a key book that leaders like to use to go to for principles, so I feel like you'd really be missing out if we didn't spend a few weeks in the book of Ezra. You're gonna see some fantastic leadership principles, and of course, it's gonna tie into the New Testament as well. But this next section we're gonna cover is called Ezra, Learning Concepts of Biblical Leadership. We're gonna learn some concepts. You say, well, why Ezra? Why in the world are we going to Ezra? What about Nehemiah? Well, Nehemiah is also a great leadership book, so we'll be referencing that along with Ezra. But put down in your blank here that Ezra is the book that records the restoration of Jerusalem. Remember the Babylonian captivity? Because of Israel's rebellion, God sent Nebuchadnezzar. Initially, he sent Assyria to hold them hostage, to invade, and then he used Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, to kind of seal the deal. So here's Jerusalem, here's the Israelites, they're in captivity, and it was a 70-year captivity as prophesied by the prophet Daniel and Jeremiah. So what we have here is, towards the end of that captivity, God allows restoration of Israel to take place. It's all foreshadowing the tribulation and the second coming of Christ. Okay? We see this stuff over and over again in the other classes. So put down in your blank here that this book records the restoration of Jerusalem, and in your parentheses the word is building. It's the building, the temple. And then it's the resurrection of the worship of God in the temple, and then you're going to put down the word people. So really what you have in the first half of the book of Ezra, it focuses on the building itself. They're putting the work together, the manpower to build the temple, the physical building. And then the second half, it's restoring the people. So this book demonstrates leadership and the ability to take something destroyed and rebuild it. I don't know of a better book to go to for leadership. It's called revitalization. You guys ever heard of that word, to revitalize something? There's a real big push right now on pastors going out to churches that are dying and revitalizing them. And I'm going to shoot you straight. That's one of the most difficult tasks, I think, on the face of this planet. I think that would be probably even harder than a neurosurgeon, you know, to have to go through all their schooling and every little minute detail you gotta be careful with. I've heard that cross-cultural missions is one of the most difficult, and I would say church revitalization would be the second one, because it's nearly impossible. Nearly impossible. HBF, they just sent out a church, a plant to revitalize another work, another church, and it's been a nightmare. Anytime that I've seen good Bible-believing men sent out to revitalize a work, it's impossible. Now, I'm not saying it never works, because God does the impossible. So understand that. But think of parenting, and I've seen also examples of this where there have been parents that have gotten saved later in life and their children are already in their pre-teen years. So they've raised their kids, allowing them to do whatever they want. They've not disciplined them according to the Bible, and they're like, well, man, how do we start disciplining the right way? Because I feel like that my children aren't taking it from me. They won't receive a spanking anymore, and you can hardly spank a preteen anyway. They're getting to that point where they're getting too big. But it's to the point where that concrete is almost formed. You can't shape them. It's almost impossible. What do you say? I can't just say, oh, just use the Bible. Well, they do need God's grace, and God will give them the grace, and I've seen him do that in families where you would say it's too late, but it's nearly impossible. So what we're seeing in the book of Ezra is this man is not only building a temple, which that's vital, but he's in charge of restoring the people, because their hearts were in rebellion. Just because God brought them back into the land did not mean that it was going to be peaches and cream for Ezra. He had to take this group of rebellious people and bring about a true revival. And revival is not near as easy, especially in today's world. We live in the days of Laodicea, the rights of the people. It's my rights. Who are you to tell me to do that? Dude, all I did was just ask where you were. Chill out. Had people get offended if you asked them where they were and they missed church, let alone to die for the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what we're dealing with here. So, 2 Corinthians 9:8, somebody read that verse in your sheet.
And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye always having all sufficiency in all things may abound to every good work.
That's a promise right there. What you have, Paul promises. Basically what that promise is anything that you need to do for anything that you want to do for him, God's going to provide it anytime you want to do it. You say, God seriously promises me that? Well, it's conditional. I didn't put the verse before on there. But if you wanted to know what the condition is, it's that verse that we hate. It's 2 Corinthians 9:7 talks about how God loveth a cheerful giver. So this promise is conditional. The fact that God will give you anything you need to do, and anything that you want to do for him, it's got to be for him, anytime you want to do it. It's conditional on the fact that you're a cheerful giver. I didn't say a giver, I said a cheerful giver, because God looks at the heart. So Ezra was a cheerful giver. And don't only think money. Yes, it's got to involve your money as well, but it's got to begin with your heart. If you give God your heart, he'll have everything else. So I think this is a great verse to give us the fuel for how we're going to actually bring revitalization. You say, well, my home's a wreck. I need to revitalize it. Okay, claim 2 Corinthians 9:8. Start there. Make sure that you're cheerfully giving, and then you can claim it, and God can do the impossible. He can definitely do the impossible, but you have to depend on him. So what we're going to see here as we go through this book of Ezra is just, part of leadership is being able to do several things at the same time. It's time to step it up a little bit, and sometimes you got to learn to say, yeah, I'm multitasking here. And be careful with that, because, you don't want to focus on so many different things that you're doing things with mediocrity. Okay, that's not my point. But there are times where you're going to have to learn to deal with two battles at once. As you're growing, there's a little more expected of you. So we're going to see Ezra has to deal with that. There's also times you're going to deal with opposition. We're going to see how Ezra dealt with opposition with his leadership. And opposition comes in many forms. What are our three foes that we have as Christians? The three primary foes that oppose the Lord Jesus Christ. What would they be? The devil's one.
Other believers, followers.
Followers of Christ? They're not supposed to be our foes.
They're not supposed to be, but they can be.
They can be, the devil can use them, I believe, yeah. But think of the devil, and then he's the god of what? The devil's the god of
What?
this world. So the devil, the world, and then what's the biggest one? So what does 24/7? Our flesh. The world, the flesh, and the devil. Constant opposition. So remember that as Christians, that those are the three foes that we always have against us, and that's what Ezra had to deal with as well. So Ezra 1:1-5, let's have somebody read those first 5 verses.
Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you, of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. And whosoever remaineth in my place where he sojourneth, let the men of his place help him with silver, and with gold, and with goods, and with beasts, beside the freewill offering for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all them whose spirit God has raised, or had raised, to go up to build the house of the Lord which is in Jerusalem.
Okay, so that's all we're gonna cover tonight. In fact, we only have a few minutes, so I'd like to get through it if we can. But put down in your first blank, the first 2 verses are the history. And I don't wanna spend much time here, as fun as it is. But what we have going on is a Gentile king was stirred by God to build his house. Isn't that crazy? God's people, the Jews, are in captivity, and so God stirs in this heart of a Gentile king to actually be the one to initiate this. What in the world's going on here? Put down in your next blank that what we have is a king who's a prophetic type of the King of England. Prophetic is your word. He's prophetic of the King of England, and the reason we say England, just as Persia was the world power in Ezra, England had been a world power for centuries. You guys ever heard that phrase, the sun never sets on the British Empire? So we're not gonna look at this chart here for time's sake, but what you have on that paper, it's a little bit of the order of the books. You guys do know, you've heard in the other classes that these books aren't in chronological order. So what you have all the way from Kings to Psalms, if it's not chronological, what kind of order is it? What would you say? Think of a word that starts with a D.
Well, dispensation.
Dispensational. It's a dispensational order. So if you look at that little chart, you've got Kings and Chronicles, which is technically the last book in the Hebrew Bible. That ends with the ruin of Israel. They get put into captivity. And then by the time you get to Ezra, you've got the temple built, Nehemiah, the walls rebuilt, Esther, there's a wedding feast, there's a rapture that takes place, Job, you've got a tribulation, Psalms, you've got David on the throne. Now, yeah, was that an accident that God put that in this order? That's what's so neat about this. This is a side note, but you're only gonna get that in your English Bible. So I'm just saying that to let you know that you don't have to go back to the originals. We have something even better right here. That's what I love about it. But here's the point to get. I wish we had time to camp out on that. It's some really neat things. I mean, there's gold in that little chart right there. That prophesies what's happened in the last century. But put down in your blank here that God specializes in using anyone and anything. So in this case, who did God use? A Gentile king, the king of Persia. And I think this is a key leadership point for us, because as leaders, We wanna be used. We wanna be useful. The world teaches us to follow our dreams, our ambitions, all these things that like, man, I just wanna leave a legacy and make a big difference. Well, the thing we need to catch is this: anyone can be used. I mean, God used a Gentile king for his glory, who is a heathen. God used Balaam. Remember Balaam? He wasn't even saved. And yet God used him as a seer. He used Balaam's ass to talk. God can use the rocks to cry out if he wants. God uses police officers. And Taylor, you know this, that there's a lot of police officers that hate God, they hate religion, they hate anything that stands for that. I'm not saying all of them, there's a lot of good ones too. But my point is this: they're called ministers of righteousness. Isn't that something? People who are serving him, are ministers to him, leaders, they hate him, and they don't even know that there's ministers. That's just goes to show how incredible God is and how, oh, you can be used by him, but that's not the key. So put down in this blank here that God is not as concerned with our usefulness. He's not as concerned with our usefulness to him as he is that we love him. Let's go to actually not first, let's go to John chapter 21. John 21. John 21, verse 15. This is after Peter denied Christ 3 times. He lost his discipleship. He didn't lose his salvation. He did lose his discipleship. And so God is bringing him back to where he can get back on track and follow the Lord. Somebody read verse 15.
So when they had dined, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? He saith unto him, Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee. He saith unto him, Feed my lambs.
And then, of course, Jesus asks him again, and Peter's almost hurt. Why would you ask me that? And here's the point. Jesus didn't say, Simon, Simon, Peter, are you useful to me? No, he says, do you love me? Because that's his concern. Remember that as leaders. It's not about being used. God will use anybody, anything. It's about loving him. He wants your heart. I think that's a great principle. And so as we look at the history, we look at, oh, God even used a Gentile king, Persia. Then let's take that point and run with it. All right, now we're going to get into the actual leadership aspect. And point 2 here, we only got a few minutes. Your next blank is the priorities. In essence, the priority was simply go build the house. God says, I've got a house that needs built. My house comes first. And so in your blank here, what you need to catch is that the temple had to be rebuilt before the city. You see, the book of Ezra is roughly 100 years, give or take, before the book of Nehemiah. Well, do you remember what the book of Nehemiah is all about? If Ezra's about building the temple, what's Nehemiah about?
Walls rebuilt.
The wall, the city. A city without a wall is broken down, it's defenseless. So put down in your little blank here, the temple to be rebuilt for the city. Ezra is before Nehemiah. Ezra first, and then Nehemiah. Why? Because God's temple should be the priority. In the Old Testament, that's where God dwelled. So we're dealing with priorities here now. And there's a reason that God had it in that specific order. Normally, we think that, well, we got to get defense down and our tactics, and logic says we got to make sure that we're protecting ourselves from the enemy. But if you look at point A, somebody read what that says underneath it.
Strength and power to build the walls come first from the Lord.
Which is opposite of how mankind normally tends to do things. I don't know if you guys have had your tribe meeting yet for this week, but this next point, we reference Matthew 4:10 on the fact that God expects worship even before we serve him. Worship always comes first. So in your blank, worship to God is the actual priority. Worship to God. And we're not gonna turn there, but there's a reference we put on your sheet. It's Haggai 1:1-10. That's actually a contemporary book that goes with the book of Ezra, because that's where they're reconstructing the temple. Well, in that book, God's calling them to rebuild that temple, and he has to rebuke them. He says, you guys, consider your ways. You're sitting there so fixed and focused on your own houses, you're neglecting the temple. So it gives us a little bit of behind the scenes what's going on in the book of Ezra. Remember, Ezra did not have it easy. He's trying to revitalize this group of people. And really what's going on in your blank there, put down that they were building their own houses first. They're building their own houses, and God's saying, guys, my temple comes first. Now, how often does that happen? I got convicted one time in my personal quiet time, years ago reading that. I don't know if you guys remember, in our basement of the other building, we used to get flooded all the time, but the 4th, 5th, 6th grade classroom was where we, Carrie and I taught. We had maybe 2 other college student teachers at the time. And that class was falling apart. The ceiling, the grid, the drop ceiling was bent, a mess. The floor needed outdoor carpet. It was just a nasty, dingy room. And we didn't have any money as a church. We looked at the budget, and there's so many other needs. So I remember I read that passage. It happened to be tax season. And all I could think about was, well, we're redoing our bathroom downstairs. We needed our bathroom redone, and it was gonna take probably a good couple $1,000 to pull that off, to do it the way we wanted to do it. And man, the Holy Spirit convicted me. I'm just thinking, there's major needs in the temple, the church, and I'm just making print application. And yet, I'm putting my own house first, exactly what he says in the first chapter of Haggai. And I knew that God wasn't saying that anybody and everybody should just do that, but for me personally, I got so convicted. I knew God was saying, you're getting all this tax money that you don't even deserve. That's not your money. And he convicted me to use that and put it towards the church. And I say all that just to say that I wish I would do that kind of stuff more often. But what a convicting reminder that, man, we need to put God's house first. Why is it that when somebody doesn't want something, they tend to give it to the church? Well, I didn't need it, so here. Seriously? You're giving God your leftovers? That tends to be how it works. So if you wanted application for the New Testament believer, we know in 1 Corinthians 6:19 that we are the house of God. Right? Our bodies are the temple. And because of that, Acts 20:28, that's where Paul tells his shepherds, that group of elders, hey guys, take heed to yourself first, then to the flock of God. So make sure that you're where you need to be with the Lord as you're ministering to them. And then the second sub-point underneath that is, people are more important than buildings. People are more important than buildings. Years ago, I remember when somebody was telling me a story. Our church was a lot smaller. It was to the point where they were saying they couldn't cut like a check. And this would have been maybe back in the 90s even. It was such a long time ago. And it was the guy who was working in the bookkeeping at the time, and he thought, okay, I got a choice to make. I can either pay the power bill, or I can pay our pastor his salary. And I think it would have been right after he even took a leave of faith and said, man, the church needs me full time. So this was huge. And this bookkeeper decided to pay the power bill. Well, Bob Berry, Bob's a good man, he found out about that, and he said, heck no, that ain't gonna happen on my watch. He went and talked to this guy and said, I don't care if our church power gets shut down. People are more important than buildings. And I love that. And I think it's that mentality that it has to start with leadership. If that's not a value, then we'll be like most other churches. And we'll make building payments and landscaping and all these things that really don't matter at the end of the day. That'll be the priority. The very first time we ever went to Belize was because we were able to sell that church bell. Was at the other building. That covered Mike's airfare and ticket, and it established a relationship with the entire country. So, praise the Lord for what, that point, that people are more important than buildings. Now, in cultures, in many cultures, and you see it sometimes creeping in ours, a church building is more important than people. But we gotta let this book override culture. So, that's all I'm gonna say about that. I think we have time. I know I'm late. Let's finish this. This will take 2 minutes tops. The last point is the Spirit. And when you read verse 5, who's there?
Ezra 1:5.
Yep.
Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests, and the Levites, with all of them whose spirit God had raised to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem.
Okay, so it was the Spirit of God that raised these people to go. You gotta capture that. If we don't start off with the beginning point being the Spirit of God, then we're trying to kick our own doors open. So put down in your blank here that this is the beginning point for all legitimate ministry. Who's the one that initiated it? Was it Ezra? No. It was God. God's the one who actually initiated it, and he used a Gentile king to do that. So, on a closing note, it's vital that prayer and a walk with the Lord are what takes place in that leader's life. It's got to begin there. For Nehemiah, you could put down on this blank that it began with a burden. It always begins with some kind of burden that God places in your heart. So even as you're going through this leadership workbook, I think it's going to be exposed, the burdens that God has put within you. I mean, Taylor, you spoke to me at times how you've got a burden for those who have been in war and those who are post-traumatic war and have seen things and felt things, and you've identified with them. So whatever that burden is, but it's got to be the burden that God has placed on your heart. And so the last thing you need to get, and we won't turn there for time's sake, but it's in Psalm 37:4, that verse that says, delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Great verse. It's not a matter of God joining you, but you joining God. Like I said earlier, society, they teach us to follow our dreams, our ambitions, be useful. Oh, and by the way, invite God along, join you. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. God says, now how about you join me? And that's a key point in leadership. God's the one that takes the wheel. We join him. So, any questions on that? Man, we got through it. I was surprised. Didn't get to turn to some of the verses. But. So this is what we're going to see in Ezra. It all began with a burden through the Spirit of God. And we're going to start seeing some of that opposition take place, how to deal with it. So get those first 3 principles looked at. Answer those questions. And then we'll discuss it probably the first 10, 15 minutes of class next week. All right, guys, 15 minutes.